They left her in the snow with no coat, no shoes, and no prayer. The wind that night carried her name like it was already a ghost, soft, fading, swallowed by the white. She was 19 years old, and the people who shared her blood had decided she was worth less than the mule tied to their wagon. They turned the horses around without looking back. Not one of them, not even her mother. Before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. Sending love your way, wherever the wind finds you. Now lean in close, because this story isn't about the cold that nearly killed her. It's about the man who found her. A mountain man with eyes like wet stone and hands that had buried more bodies than he'd ever held. He didn't speak much. He didn't smile at all. And when he looked down at her frozen body curled against a pine root, he didn't see a dying girl. He saw a wife. Some folks in those high country towns would later swear he saved her out of mercy. Others whispered it was something darker, something older, something the mountain itself had whispered into his ear the night she came stumbling into his life. The truth? The truth is colder than the snow that nearly took her. And by the end of the story, you're going to understand why she never once tried to leave him, even when she had every chance in the world. The wagon wheels crunched over frozen earth like teeth grinding bone. Eliza Hart sat in the back of that wagon with her knees pulled to her chest, watching her breath turn to fog and disappear. She was wearing a thin gray dress, the same one she'd worn to her father's funeral 3 weeks earlier. Her shoes had been taken from her the night before. Her stepmother said they were too good for a girl who brought shame on the house. Her bare feet had gone numb somewhere outside of Pinedale, and now they didn't feel like feet at all. They felt like 2 stones tied to her ankles. Her older brother, Caleb, drove the wagon. He hadn't said a word to her in 2 days. Not since the meeting in the parlor, where her stepmother had stood by the fireplace with a Bible in one hand and a list of sins in the other. Eliza's sin was simple. She had refused to marry the man they'd chosen for her, a 46-year-old land broker named Mr. Hollis, who had buried 2 wives already and looked at Eliza like she was a calf he was sizing up for slaughter. She'd said no, just once, quietly, at the dinner table, and that no had cost her everything. The Wyoming sky that morning was the color of old tin. The clouds hung so low they seemed to brush the tops of the pines, and the first snow of the season had begun to fall in slow, lazy spirals, the kind of snow that looked beautiful until you understood what it could do to a person. The wagon climbed higher into the foothills, away from town, away from the road, away from anywhere a body might be found. Eliza knew what was happening. She'd known since they made her climb into the wagon at dawn. She'd known when her stepmother refused to look at her. She'd known when her younger sister, Ruth, had pressed a small wooden cross into her hand and whispered, "I'm sorry," before running back into the house and shutting the door. They weren't taking her anywhere. They were leaving her. Caleb finally stopped the wagon at the edge of a stand of black pines, where the road thinned into nothing more than a deer trail. He climbed down without looking at her. He walked around to the back, lowered the gate, and waited. "Get out," he said. His voice was flat, not cruel, not kind, just empty, like a man reading a price off a feed sack. Eliza didn't move at first. She stared at him, at the brother who used to carry her on his shoulders through the orchard, who used to slip her sugar candies when their father wasn't looking. That boy was gone. The man standing in front of her now had their stepmother's eyes. "Caleb, please." Her voice cracked. "Please, I'll marry him. I'll do whatever you want. Just take me home." He shook his head once. "Too late for that. It's freezing. I'll die out here. Then die quiet." The words hit her harder than any slap. She climbed down slowly, her bare feet sinking into the snow. The cold went up through her bones like a knife. She turned to him one last time, with the wooden cross still clutched in her fist. "You're my brother," she whispered. He climbed back onto the wagon. Not anymore. The horses pulled forward. The wagon turned, and Eliza Hart stood barefoot in the snow, watching the only family she'd ever known disappear into the white. She watched until the wagon was nothing but a black smudge on the horizon. She watched until even the sound of the wheels was gone. And then she was alone, truly alone, in a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. She didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was for people who still believed someone might come. She started walking. She didn't know where. She just knew that if she stopped, she would die. So she put one numb foot in front of the other, the snow biting deeper with every step, and she walked into the pines. The wind picked up. The snow thickened. Her dress, thin as paper, did nothing against the cold. Within an hour, she couldn't feel her hands. Within 2, she couldn't feel her face. By the time the sun began to set behind the ridge, turning the sky the color of an old bruise, Eliza Hart was no longer walking. She was crawling. And somewhere, high above her on a ridge she could not see, a man with a long rifle and a wolfskin coat had stopped his horse. He was watching her. He had been watching her for almost an hour. He didn't move to help. Not yet. His name was Silas Vane, and he had not spoken to another human being in 11 months. He lived alone in a cabin he'd built with his own hands on the north face of Black Hollow Mountain, a place so remote that even the trappers avoided it, and the Shoshone called it the place where the wind forgets its name. He was 38 years old, tall and lean as a winter wolf, and his face carried the kind of stillness that came from years of having no one to perform it for. His beard was dark, streaked with the first gray of a hard life. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, the way a frozen river looks at dawn. He had come to the mountain 7 years ago, after burying a wife and a child in the same week. He'd never told anyone the story. He never would. That afternoon, he had ridden down from the high country to check his trap lines along the lower creek. He was leading his packhorse home when he saw the wagon, saw it from a half-mile away, a black speck moving along a road that no honest traveler would take in winter. He'd watched it stop. He'd watched the girl climb out. He'd watched the wagon turn around and leave her. He had seen this before. Not often, but enough. In these parts, when a family wanted to be rid of a daughter who shamed them, or a daughter they could no longer feed, they sometimes did it this way. They called it giving her to the mountain. It was cleaner than murder. It let them keep their souls intact, or at least pretend to. Silas spat into the snow. He should have ridden on. That's what he told himself. He had problems of his own. He had meat to smoke, wood to split, a roof that leaked when the snow grew heavy. He had no use for a half-frozen girl. No use for a wife. No use for the kind of complication a woman brought into a man's quiet life. And yet, he sat on his horse and watched her crawl. He watched her get up. He watched her fall. He watched her get up again. There was something in the way she refused to lie down that reached into his chest and twisted. He had buried a daughter once. She would have been about that age if she'd lived. The thought came uninvited. He shoved it away. Still, he did not move. The sun sank lower. The shadows of the pines stretched long and blue across the snow. The temperature was dropping fast. He could feel it in his teeth. A girl in a thin dress, with no shoes, would not last the night. She might not last another hour. She fell again. This time she did not get up. Silas watched her lie there for a long moment. Her dark hair spread across the white snow like ink spilled on paper. She wasn't moving. Maybe it was already over. Maybe the mountain had taken her the way it took so many. He waited. Then, very faintly, he saw her hand close around something. A small dark shape. A wooden cross. She lifted it to her lips. And Silas Vane, who had not prayed in 7 years, felt something break loose inside him. He clicked his tongue. His horse started down the slope. He rode slow, partly because the grade was steep and partly because he wasn't yet sure what he was going to do. By the time he reached her, the last light of day was bleeding out of the sky. He swung down from the saddle and crouched beside her in the snow. She was alive, barely. Her lips had gone blue. Her eyelashes were crusted with frost. When he turned her over, she made a small sound. Not a word, just a breath. And her eyes fluttered open for half a second. They were dark brown, the color of riverbed stones, and they tried to focus on his face. She whispered something. He leaned down to hear. "Don't leave me." It hit him harder than he expected. like a fist against an old bruise. He pulled off his wolfskin coat and wrapped her in it. He scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, like a bundle of dry sticks, and he laid her across the front of his saddle. He climbed up behind her, one arm tight around her waist to keep her upright. He turned his horse north, toward the cabin, toward home. As he rode, the snow began to fall in earnest, big wet flakes that swallowed the world in white. He pulled his hat lower and kept one hand pressed against her chest, feeling for the faint beat of her heart through the wolf skin. He did not yet know her name. He did not yet know what he was going to do with her. But he had already decided one thing, somewhere in the cold quiet of his own mind. A decision that surprised even him, a decision he could not yet explain. He was not going to let her die, and he was not going to let her go. Eliza woke to the smell of wood smoke and pine. For a long moment, she did not open her eyes. She was warm. That was the first thing, the impossible, miraculous fact of warmth. She felt the weight of heavy furs on top of her. She felt the soft crackle of a fire somewhere nearby. She felt rough wool against her cheek. She was not dead. The thought came slowly, like a sunrise. She had been so certain. She remembered the snow. She remembered the cross in her hand. She remembered a face. A man's face, bearded, pale-eyed, leaning down out of the dusk like something out of an old story. She opened her eyes. The cabin was small. One room. A stone fireplace burned at one end, throwing long shadows across log walls hung with traps, knives, snowshoes, and the dried pelts of animals she didn't recognize. A heavy oak table stood in the center, scarred from years of use. A single window, frosted at the edges, let in a thin gray light. The air smelled of smoke, of cedar, of something cooking slowly in an iron pot. And there, sitting on a low stool by the fire, was the man. He was sharpening a knife. Long, slow strokes against a whetstone. He had not yet noticed she was awake. Eliza studied him. She did not move. She did not speak. She watched him the way a rabbit watches a wolf, without breathing, without blinking, every nerve in her body screaming at her to be still. He was big, though not in the loud way men in town were big. His size was quiet, coiled. His hands were enormous, scarred across the knuckles, but they moved with a craftsman's care. His dark hair was tied back with a strip of leather. He wore a homespun shirt the color of bark and brown trousers tucked into tall, soft boots. She tried to move her fingers under the furs. They tingled. They hurt. That was good. It meant they were still there. She tried her toes. They hurt too. The man stopped sharpening. He did not look at her. But she knew somehow that he knew she was awake. "Don't try to sit up yet," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected, and rougher, like a voice that had not been used in a long time. There was no anger in it. There was no kindness either. It was just a voice plain as a stone. Eliza tried to speak. Her throat was raw. The word came out as a whisper. "Where?" "My cabin. North side of Black Hollow." He finally turned his head. The pale eyes settled on her, and she felt something tighten in her stomach. "You were dying. I brought you here. How long?" 2 days. 2 days. She tried to process it. 2 days ago she had been left to die. 2 days ago her brother had said die quiet. 2 days ago her own family had crossed her out of the world. Her eyes filled. She didn't want them to. She turned her face into the wool blanket so the man would not see. He let her cry. He said nothing. He went back to sharpening his knife, and the slow, steady scrape of steel on stone was the only sound in the cabin for a long, long time. When she finally lifted her head, he set the knife aside. "You hungry?" She nodded. He ladled something from the iron pot into a wooden bowl. Stew of some kind, venison, root vegetables, dark broth. He brought it to her and helped her sit up against a folded fur. He held the bowl while she ate. Her hands shook too badly to hold it herself. She ate slowly. He watched her without expression. When she was finished, he set the bowl on the floor. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza. Eliza Hart." He nodded once as if filing it away. "Silas Vane." "Thank you," she whispered. "For Don't. He held up one hand. Just a small motion, but it stopped her. Don't thank me yet. Something in his tone made the warmth drain out of her chest. What do you mean? He looked at the fire for a long moment. The flames danced in his pale eyes, and for the first time, she saw something there. Not cruelty, not kindness, but a kind of weight. A man carrying something heavy he had no intention of putting down. You can stay here, he said quietly. You can heal. You can eat. You can sleep by this fire as long as you need. But when spring comes, you don't go back. She stared at him. You don't go back to that town. You don't go back to that family. You don't write them. You don't speak their names. As far as the world is concerned, Eliza Hart died in the snow on the 3rd of November. And me, he held her eyes. You stay here, with me, as my wife. The word hung in the air between them like smoke that wouldn't clear. Eliza opened her mouth. She closed it. She didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful or angry or something else entirely. Some fourth feeling she had no name for. Silas saw the question forming in her face. He shook his head once, slowly. Not like that, he said. Not the way you're thinking. I won't touch you. Not unless one day you ask me to. You'll have your own bed, your own corner, your own quiet. But to the world, to anyone who comes asking, you're my wife. You carry my name. That name is the only thing in these mountains that'll keep you safe. Safe from what? He looked at the fire again. From men worse than the ones who left you. Outside, the wind rose against the cabin walls, low and long, like the howl of something far off. Eliza pulled the furs tighter around her shoulders. She did not say yes. She did not say no. But somewhere, in the deep frozen quiet of her chest, a small new thing had begun to thaw. The winter that followed was the longest of Eliza's life, and somehow, the gentlest. Silas Vane was a man of small mercies and fewer words. He woke before the sun every morning, no matter how deep the cold. She would hear the soft thump of his boots on the wooden floor, the creak of the door, the crunch of snow as he stepped out to feed the horse and check the traps. By the time she rose, there would be a kettle of water heating by the fire, a piece of bread on the table, and fresh wood stacked by the hearth. He never asked her to do anything. He simply did what needed doing and left her to heal. For the first 2 weeks, she could barely walk. Her feet had come close to frostbite. 2 of her smaller toes had gone black at the tips, and she had wept silently the first time she saw them, certain she would lose them. Silas had only looked at her feet, grunted once, and said, "They'll keep." Then he made a poultice of pine resin and something he called bear root, and he wrapped her feet every morning and every night. By the end of the 3rd week, the black had faded to pink. The toes stayed. She watched him work. She watched him strip a hide with hands so steady they barely seemed to move. She watched him mend a broken snowshoe with strips of rawhide and his teeth. She watched him sit by the fire at night and read a worn leather-bound Bible by the light of a single tallow candle, his lips moving silently over the words. He read it every night. He never read aloud. She learned things about him slowly, the way you learn the shape of a stone by running your fingers over it in the dark. He had been born in Tennessee. He had fought in the war on a side he never named. He had come west afterward, and somewhere along the way he had loved a woman named Mary and had a daughter named June. Both of them were buried under a young aspen tree about a 1/4 mile behind the cabin. Eliza found the graves one afternoon when she was strong enough to walk that far. 2 small wooden crosses, weathered gray, with no names carved on them. She understood, looking at those crosses, why Silas Vane never spoke of his past. She understood, too, why he had not let her die. She did not ask him about it. She knew, somehow, that asking would close a door that was only barely cracked open. Christmas came and went without ceremony. He gave her a pair of soft deerskin moccasins he had stitched himself, and a comb carved from elk antler. She had nothing to give him. She told him so, her voice breaking with shame. He looked at her for a long moment. "You being alive," he said quietly, "is a gift enough." Then he turned away, busy at the fire, and did not speak again for the rest of the night. She thought about that sentence for days. By February, she was strong enough to help with the work. She learned to scrape hides. She learned to mend his shirts. She learned to make biscuits in the iron skillet over the coals. She learned the names of the birds that came to the windowsill in the early mornings. The chickadees, the gray jays, the small bold nuthatches that walked headfirst down the pines outside. She learned to listen to silence without being afraid of it. One night in late February, a blizzard came down hard. The wind screamed against the cabin walls for 2 days straight. The roof groaned. The fire guttered. Silas spent most of the storm sitting by the door with his rifle across his knees, watching the latch as if he expected something to come through it. On the second night, Eliza finally asked, "What are you waiting for?" He didn't look at her. "Anybody." "What kind of anybody?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The man who used to own this hollow had a brother. The brother didn't take kindly to being driven off. He's been coming back on and off for 3 years, mostly drunk, mostly cursing. But he's still got 2 friends who ride with him, and the friends are worse than he is. They come up the South Trail when the weather lets them. The weather doesn't let them often. And you think they'd come now? In a storm." He finally looked at her. "Now they've got a reason." "What reason?" "You." She felt the cold come back into her chest. "Word travels," Silas said. "Even out here. A trapper named Boudreaux came by in January. He saw you through the window. By now half the valley knows the mountain man has a woman. They'll be curious. The wrong kind of curious." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. "What do we do?" "Nothing. We wait. We watch. And if they come..." His pale eyes were very still. "You stay behind me. You don't say a word. You let me handle it." The storm broke the next morning. The world outside was a hush of white, soft and unbroken. No tracks, no riders, just the sun coming pale over the eastern ridge and the smoke from their chimney rising straight up into a windless sky. For the moment, the mountain had held its breath. For the moment, they were safe. But that night, as Eliza lay on her cot across the room from Silas's, she stared at the ceiling and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. And underneath the hope, like a stone beneath still water, the first quiet beginnings of love. They came on a Tuesday in early April, when the snow had begun to soften and the first green shoots were pushing up through the mud along the creek. Eliza was outside hanging a deer hide on the drying rack when she heard them. 3 horses, coming slow up the South Trail. She knew the sound of Silas's horse, and she knew the sound of a single rider, and this was neither. She went very still. Silas had taught her over the long winter what to do. She did not run. She did not call out. She set the hide down carefully, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked back into the cabin at the same pace she always walked. She did not look toward the trail. She did not look at all. Inside, Silas was already at the door. He had heard them too. He held his long rifle in one hand and a heavy pistol in the other. He did not look afraid. He looked like a man checking a fence post. "Behind me," he said quietly. "Bedroom. Door closed. You don't come out. Not for any voice. Not even mine." "Silas?" "Not even mine, Eliza." She nodded. She went into the small back room where her cot was. She closed the door. She pressed her ear to the wood. She heard the horses come into the yard. She heard a man laugh. A hard, ugly laugh. The laugh of a man who had been drinking since breakfast. She heard Silas step out onto the porch. She heard the soft, deliberate click of him cocking the rifle. "Vane," a voice called. "Heard you got yourself a bride. We come to give our regards. You can give M from the trail." Silas's voice was flat and even. "And then you can ride back down it. Now that ain't very neighborly." "I ain't a neighbor." There was a pause. Eliza pressed harder against the door, her heart hammering. "We just want to see her, Vane." A second voice. Younger. Wheedling. "Just want to see if the stories are true. They say she's pretty. They say she came up out of the snow like a ghost. We're curious folk. Curiosity's gonna get you killed, Cal. Now, see, that's the kind of talk that makes a man feel unwelcome. You are unwelcome. A third voice, deeper, slower. Word in town is she ain't your wife at all. Word in town is she's a heart girl. From Pinedale. Family thought she was dead. Family might want to know she ain't. Eliza's breath stopped. She had not heard her family's name spoken aloud in 5 months. To hear it now, in the mouth of a stranger, in her own yard, was like being struck. Silas did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had dropped lower, quieter, the way a knife sounds when it's being drawn slowly from a sheath. She's my wife. Whatever name she had before don't exist anymore. You ride into Pinedale and tell anybody different. You better be ready for what comes up that trail after you. That a threat, Vane? It's a promise. There was a long silence. Eliza heard the horses shift. She heard one of the men spit. You can't watch her every minute, the deeper voice said. Mountains are big. Winters are long. Accidents happen. Accidents happen down in the valley too, Silas said. Sometimes a man rides out to check his fences and never comes back. Sometimes his friends ride out looking and don't come back either. The mountain don't ask questions, Briggs. It just takes what falls in it. Another silence, longer this time. Then, finally, the creak of leather as a man turned his horse. This ain't done, Vane. It's done for today. The horses moved. The sound of hooves grew softer, then was gone. Eliza waited. She did not move. She did not breathe. After what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, the bedroom door opened. Silas stood there with the rifle still in his hand. His face was the same as it always was. But his eyes, she had never seen them look like that. Not cold, not angry, something else. Something almost like grief. He set the rifle against the wall. They'll be back, he said. When? Don't know. A week, a month. They'll wait until they think we've forgotten. She came out of the bedroom slowly. She stood in the middle of the cabin, in the place where the sunlight fell through the small frosted window, and she looked at the man who had saved her life and was now risking his own to keep her in it. Silas. Her voice was very small. Why are you doing this for me? He didn't answer at first. He walked to the fireplace. He stared into the coals. When he finally spoke, it was not the answer she expected. Because once, he said, a long time ago, I came home from a hunt and found my wife and daughter on the floor of a cabin not unlike this one. 3 men had ridden in while I was gone. 3 men a lot like the 3 that just left. I was a day late getting home, Eliza. One day, he turned. His pale eyes were wet. I won't be a day late again. She crossed the room. She didn't think about it. She didn't plan it. She just walked to him, and she put her arms around him. This enormous, silent, scarred man, and she pressed her face against his chest and held on. For a long moment he didn't move, and then, slowly, like a tree learning how to bend again, his arms came around her. Outside, somewhere down the South Trail, 3 men were riding back toward the valley with murder in their mouths and a name in their pockets. But inside the cabin, for the first time in 7 years, Silas Vane was not alone. And for the first time in her life, neither was Eliza Hart. They came back on a clear night in May, under a moon so bright it threw shadows like noon. Silas had been waiting. He had not slept properly in 3 weeks. He dug a shallow pit at the bend in the South Trail and lined it with sharpened stakes. He'd strung a thin wire between 2 pines at horse-chest height. He'd cleaned and oiled every weapon in the cabin twice over. Eliza had watched him prepare with the same quiet patience he had once used to nurse her back to life, and she understood, finally, what kind of man he was. He was a man who had lost everything once, and who would burn the mountain to the ground before he lost it again. She did not try to talk him out of it. She knew it would be like trying to talk a river out of running downhill. Instead, she did what he asked. She cleaned the rifle. She filled the powder horns. She learned, with shaking hands, how to load a pistol. And when the time came, she stood in the cabin doorway with that pistol in her hand and her jaw set hard, because she had decided something during those long weeks of waiting. She was not going to hide in the back room this time. If they were coming for her, they were going to see her. The three riders came up the trail single file, Briggs in front on a tall black horse, the younger one, Cal, behind him, and the third, a man Silas had only ever called by his last name, Mercer, bringing up the rear with a long rifle laid across his saddle. They did not make it to the cabin. The wire took Briggs's horse first. The animal went down hard, screaming, and Briggs went over its neck into the pit. What happened in the pit, Eliza did not see, and Silas never spoke of. Cal pulled up short, his horse rearing, and in the moment of confusion Silas stepped out from behind a pine with his rifle already at his shoulder. The shot was clean. Cal was dead before he hit the ground. Mercer was the dangerous one. Mercer was the one Silas had been afraid of. Mercer wheeled his horse and fired, and his shot tore a long red line across Silas's shoulder before Silas could get the rifle back up. Silas dropped behind a deadfall. Mercer dismounted. He moved through the trees like a man who had hunted men before. From the cabin doorway, Eliza watched it all by moonlight. She watched Mercer circle around to Silas's blind side. She watched Silas, bleeding, try to track the sound. She watched Mercer raise his rifle. And she raised her pistol. She had never shot at a man before. She had barely shot at a tree. Her hand shook so hard she could hear the gun rattle. But she remembered everything Silas had taught her. Both eyes open, breathe out, squeeze, don't pull, and she fired. She didn't kill Mercer. She hit him in the side, low and to the left. He staggered. He turned toward the cabin, his face a mask of disbelief, and that was the last thing he ever did, because Silas came up out of the deadfall and shot him through the throat. Then there was silence. A long, ringing, terrible silence under a too bright moon. Silas walked slowly out of the trees, one hand pressed to his shoulder, the rifle hanging from the other. He climbed the steps to the porch. He looked at Eliza standing in the doorway with the pistol still smoking in her hand. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and then he did something he had never done before. He kissed her. It was not the kiss of a husband to a wife. It was not even the kiss of a man to a woman. It was the kiss of a person who had finally come home, and it was soft and it tasted of gunpowder and blood and tears, and Eliza kissed him back with everything she had. They buried the three men where they fell. Silas did not mark the graves. He said the mountain would do its own remembering. In the weeks that followed, Silas healed. The wound in his shoulder closed slow but clean. Eliza took out the stitches herself one warm morning in June, while a chickadee sang outside the window and the wild roses along the creek began to bloom. That same day, she walked with him to the aspen tree behind the cabin. The two small, weathered crosses still stood there. He stood looking at them for a long time. Then he took a knife from his belt, and he knelt, and very slowly, very carefully, he carved two names into the wood that had been bare for 7 years. Mary Vane, June Vane. When he was done, he stayed kneeling. Eliza knelt beside him in the soft new grass. She did not speak. She just put her hand on his back, lightly, the way you might touch a wounded animal to let it know you were there. After a while, he said very quietly, "I told them about you." "What did you tell them?" "That you were good, that you were brave, that you saved me." She felt the tears come, and she let them. "And what did they say?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then a small, broken smile touched the corner of his mouth. The first real smile she had ever seen on him. "They said it was about time. They never went back down the mountain. In time, the world below forgot the name Eliza Hart. Her stepmother lived a long, bitter life and died alone in a Pinedale boarding house, refusing to speak of the daughter she had left in the snow. Her brother Caleb, the one who had said die quiet, drank himself into a grave by the age of 35. Her sister Ruth, the one who had pressed the wooden cross into Eliza's hand, searched for her for years. She wrote letters. She made inquiries. She paid riders to ride into the high country and ask questions. The riders always came back shaking their heads. There was a mountain man, they said, a silent man on the north face of Black Hollow. And it was rumored, a woman with him. But no one had ever spoken to her. No one had ever seen her face up close. And the mountain man did not welcome visitors. She was, for all the world knew, dead. But she was not dead. She was alive in a small cabin beneath a great open sky, with a husband who had taught her how to skin a deer and how to read the wind and how to love without speaking. She was alive in the smell of wood smoke and pine, in the cry of a hawk over the creek, in the soft weight of a wolfskin coat that he draped over her shoulders every cold morning of every winter for the rest of his life. They had a son. They named him Joseph after no one in particular. He grew up speaking little like his father and laughing often like his mother. He never knew he had an aunt named Ruth in a valley to the south. He never knew his mother had once been called Heart. He only knew that his parents loved each other in the quiet, stubborn way the mountain itself loved the things that survived on it, without saying so and without ever letting go. Silas Vane died in his sleep in the winter of 1898, with his wife's hand in his and a small wooden cross on the mantelpiece. The same cross a frightened girl had once clutched in the snow. Eliza outlived him by 9 years. She is buried under the aspen tree, beside Mary and June, and beside Silas himself. There are 4 crosses there now. The mountain remembers all of them. Her family left her in the snow to die. A stranger on a ridge chose, instead, to let her live. And in the end, the cold thing they had thrown away became the warmest fire in a lonely man's life. What would you have done in his place? Turned your horse around or kept on riding? Tell me in the comments. And before you go, stay warm out there. The mountain is always listening.